Welcome to the next edition of whatever it is we're trying to figure out. At times, I think I'm not sure. Can't remember what we called the thing.
Something rural.
Rural, yeah. So I'm not even sure where to start the session today. I can try. In other words, I sent you a link and said, watch this, because can any one of you comfortably tell me that you understand this picture? That was easy. And if you don't understand it, how would you present it to somebody else? All right?
Very carefully.
Yeah, very carefully. Well, and I commented before that I think we have an unwillingness to distill, to sort things out. All right. Brian, describe a car for me.
All right, a mechanical means of transportation.
Okay. Which you can communicate without taking the engine apart into all of its individual pieces,
right,
and describing them to someone, while all of those individual parts are relevant and essential for the car to run.
Right.
Correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay. So to present some aspect of this in a meaningful way to other people, some of it has to be abstracted to an extent where it's no longer overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's 3 to 5 or 6 loops. Well, 3 to 7, what is it, 5 to 7?
Right.
Something, okay? Or 7 plus or minus 2, or I don't know. And so I'm not arguing against the relevance of any of the pieces, though when relevance is more confusing than helpful, we need to do something about it.
Right.
So while I'm not contending that this is the answer, and I still don't agree with this,
right, okay,
that somehow we have to come to some sort of an agreement on how to take this picture and create an associated picture that has the most absolutely relevant, essential aspects that you could explain to someone, and then there are certain parts of it that have more detail associated with them. I have a flat tire, so I have to change the tire. How to change the tire is another process. Okay?
Okay, but there is a difference between your example of a car, because a car is a system which already works viably in a larger system, our highway system, our transportation system. But the system we're working on right now, the sustainable farming system, does not work as viably inside the larger food system of this country. It has all sorts of challenges that it has to overcome in order to be viable on a large scale basis. And those realities have to be recognized.
I also think it matters what you're trying to do. So who are you going to try and tell a story to?
Somebody want to grab that one?
Well, it seems like we've had two approaches to this problem. I mean, in general, as far as what I've been able to get out of the process. One is a large-scale top-down process, which I think Klaus has been pushing. And the other one, I mean, I've been pushing more of a community-based process. So
Yeah, and I would
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I would think that both of these would need a different story, right?
Yes, I
Not
think
so
so
much,
too. Mhm.
not so much a different, completely different model, but definitely a different story.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's correct that I'm pushing a top-down versus a bottom-up.
Okay. Well.
What I'm trying to say is we need to define a bottom-up model, but then see its connections to a larger ecosystem within which the community is embedded in and which and can't escape. So we have to understand both the macro and micro perspectives of the food system and understand its linkages. What is important to understand at a local food system, so you can make changes that are beneficial to the community, but still are embedded within the macro structure of the global, national, regional systems.
I would want to take this thing for a check ride before I attempted to fly it to someplace like Ethiopia, where the people aren't necessarily eating all that well. On the one hand, I want to be able to sell it at the macro level to people with resources. On the other hand, I've got to sell it at the local level to entrepreneurs and farmers who are going to implement the thing.
And I'm going to jump in, make my little comment, trying to bring it back to an idea that I saw on CBS for 60 Minutes this last time. If anyone's interested, I can send you the link. But they used this picture, and I don't know if everyone can you see that, Gene?
Yes. Yeah.
So that is just a map of consciousness of a person, a normal person, and a person on a hallucinogen. But the idea was it shows those are the interconnections of your awareness in the moment. And so I think of what we have here is a map, like Klaus was saying about, we have a big picture map and you have a description of the interconnection that is part of the story. But if you're interested, let's dive down deep to see how these connections are true or not true in the discussion. And so it goes into, and this is the way that we're mapping how we think, is the same way that we're mapping how the food system works. So I'm just trying to complement what we've done, but reinforcing, I think what Klaus is saying is that, well, what is the moment of time you're looking at? What is the information? How are you framing it, depending on the higher up scaffolding or the farther down? And if this is actually the way we think, well, this would be a way to present it too. But maybe you got to see the 60-minute program. Not trying to take us off. I was just trying to embrace the idea of the complexity of the map and the interconnections.
Were I to do this for real, I would never show this to anyone. Okay? This is, from my perspective, this is my homework. This is investigating what I and a group of other people think about this set of relationships. The thoughts that are really relevant are the thoughts of the actual stakeholders that are in here somewhere. So that the way that the article I sent you about the two people that are working on the community in Tarboro, that are in fact engaging with the stakeholders in the community, and actually different dimensions of the community see their own stories in the model because they built it so that it's relevant to them. So that rather than attempt to sell this to anyone, I would use this as my current level of understanding and work with the stakeholders for them to build their own map, which will encounter all of the same problems that we have been having. Okay, that is not a recipe for avoiding what we have been experiencing. As a matter of fact, it'll probably be worse. Though for us to come to our own understanding of how to work with others, I would want to build a distilled version of this that was easier for me to understand.
Mm. So what would you do if you, and I think you're right, the thing that struck me on the Tarboro example you sent is that the main value was derived from the fact that people built it themselves, right? That it's the model is only as useful as much as the people can relate to it and can actually use it to understand their own behavior and the behavior of others in the system. So if what you're saying is you would want to pare it down for your own improvement, what would you do? What are other things that you would look at?
Well, I after thinking about it for weeks, that's how I built this. Okay, which I didn't say is as complete as I would want to understand it, but it's something that I could build on a little bit more to be something less intense than this is. And I do that. I think I do that. I'm not absolutely sure. From starting at where it was that we said we wanted to start with. In other words, the focal point was local sustainable food, and working out from there to see what the initial levels of connection were. And this at the second level, it's already overwhelming. So to figure out how to decide these are the things that are absolutely the most relevant, and there are other things that are influences that I don't have to worry about at the moment. In other words, it's all connected, okay? So that all of the pieces that are there are relevant, though to what extent are they relevant? We went ahead and we said, okay, we decided that we would identify relationships as weak, medium, and strong connections to show different widths of relationships. Right? But it doesn't do anything to actually simplify the set of relationships.
So we have a lot of moving parts in this chart. There is, on the one hand, the impact of industrial food on health in a sense of people's health. There is the impact of destroying jobs, middle class businesses in the community, like dairies and butcher shops and medium-sized farms and things like this related around the food business. So they're all, and then most importantly, the destruction of topsoil, which is a root cause of a deterioration of the entire environment. I mean, it links all the way up to species extinction when you destroy topsoil. So water tables and so on. So there is the pathology of the existing system and how it harms community. And then there is there is a desirable state, which we haven't really framed up, of what in this particular context is a sustainable global system. But we can't go back to what it was 100 years ago or 50 years ago because everything has moved. So what is this desirable state within the context of today's technology, infrastructure, logistics systems, and so on? How can a revitalization of community happen in a globalized system?
This picture reminds me of something I saw in corporate data systems, and whatever the industry. The thing evolved to a point where change was very difficult. So you have a job called change control administrator. Okay, so you find a bug in the way checks are processed, right? Well, check processing is a 7x24 system. Oh man, we better be careful how we change this thing. We could get more damage than progress. Well, then the job of change control administrator, you have to be a little bit of a control freak, very detail oriented. You have to carry around a working model of the system in your head so that you can decide whether this fix really does fix it or not. Is this a crisis? Does the documentation that the maintenance programmer has provided, is it a lie? Is it the truth? And then the change control administrator has to be satisfied with not ever hearing a lot of gratitude.
So how do you connect that to this?
Well, where do you start changing it so that you know for sure that you've got all of the stuff that's going into what's important? I mean, you've done a great job in that simplified version that you came up with, but that's not easy. That has to be respected a lot. And what happens in corporate systems, okay? I think we get to a place where we're relying on the corporate system, and let's say we're shipping stuff. It's the system at FedEx, and then it's proven that the FedEx business model isn't very effective. It's called the attacker's advantage. Some small startup entrepreneur that's taken the time to look at it says, they're vulnerable right there. But we've got to come up with a new information system to track the movement of the product. And they do. And all of a sudden, you've gone from a situation where, for example, a taxi medallion was worth some money. Uber. Taxi medallion plummets, and being an Uber driver is something you can do kind of in and out as you care to, because somebody came up with the system at Uber, and it simplified the whole situation.
So we apply the Uber model to this here. I mean, clearly, the taxi business is not going to be what it was before Uber came online. But what it is now is not really a sustainable model either. Right. Because the Uber drivers are being exploited. I mean, they have no benefits. They have no social security. They have no medical care. So they're really hanging out there. It's a completely unsustainable solution for the labor market from many perspectives. So the question then is, how to put that genie back into the box? You're not going to go back to taxi medallions selling for $100,000 in New York. So what is the alternative? So that same struggle is what we have in the food business. You know, you can be in some godforsaken town, but you get bananas, you know, which are being imported from South America. And so how does one revive a food system that has been so incredibly taken apart, that has become so destructive on so many levels, and merge it, advance it to something that then becomes sustainable. So that's really the challenge here.
And if I think about the way that we define local sustainable, it depends upon where the community is. So if the community is in Maine, they will never grow bananas in Maine, correct? So is the community, should bananas actually be part of what they consume in Maine? Because it's not sustainable.
Well, that's what I was referring to, the genie's out of the bottle here. You know, we're not going to go backwards on providing stable like bananas. People, that would be a non-starter for the food industry and for the consumer. So there are elements that in the food supply chain that do make sense to come from outside in sources. How these bananas are being produced, is if they are organic or sustainable, is a different story. But that's, you know, that's outside the community control.
You also raised the question of, are farming communities going to be engaged in export outside of their own areas? Because if I'm not buying bananas from wherever they're coming from, the people who are growing bananas aren't buying my maple syrup. And do I need to have those markets in order to make my own community economically viable?
Yeah, so I was writing a note yesterday, my thoughts sort of evolving on that issue. It's perfectly okay to have agricultural systems produce surplus. You know, you look at the apple growers in Washington or Canada. I mean, these are phenomenal production lines, and they're organic. You know, I mean, they're well done, and they supply apples for the entire world, really, out of those regions. That's okay, for as long as they are respecting the soil and the health of their local community, I mean, of their land. You know, so for as long as you don't have a production that is destructive to the community, it operates regeneratively organic. That's one thing. Conversely, you know, there's a dairy in Eastern Oregon that has 70,000 cows on the field, which is a complete disaster for the community because they're not treating their sewage. You know, you have the stench that greets you from 2 miles away, and it harms the health of the population and, you know, the environment, the water, and everything. So I think if we contrast those two things and say, for as long as you have a dairy operation and you're processing the sewage responsibly, and you're bringing in feed for these animals that is not GMO produced, you know, creating another mess someplace else to produce the feed, then that should be okay.
From what I've been hearing from everyone here, it seems to me that it is really important to have a micro strategy and a macro strategy coming from what we are all talking about here. And if we're talking about, for example, different communities, each one of these community has their own competitive advantage, wherein we have to look at it on a macro level as well, so that the distribution of this, we have an efficient distribution of every community's advantages. So coming from this thought, I guess the map, we have to just kind of make sure that this would cover the story on how we will engage those micro and macro strategy that we're kind of looking at.
So I told you people can take naps while I'm pondering.
So we give people in Maine a spectrum of choices for getting potassium into their diets, right? Okay, do you want fresh bananas? How about capsules? How about, will banana puree do today? Because you can't raise them there, or in Minnesota, or in Colorado. Probably not even in Southern California.
Yeah, when you buy them in the store, you can only buy 2 at a time because they ripen so fast.
That's true too, because they're so far away. So it's a spectrum of choices, and it presented to all of these stakeholders.
But due to the transportation aspect, I wouldn't consider that it's part of a local sustainable food system. I think the transportation aspect of it makes it unsustainable. Now, Klaus is right. Getting people to change their demands, regardless of how ludicrous they might be, is often next to impossible. Don't tell me I can't do something.
The systems need to be not only ecologically sustainable, they need to be economically sustainable as well.
When bananas become $10 a piece, some people will change their mind.
I mean, if we just focus on what are the most destructive parts, when you go to Iowa, for example, or Illinois, places like that, where agriculture is so dominant, you have populations that are below 1 million people, but you have 20 million hogs, in the same state.
You have 20 million what?
20 million hogs.
Oh, okay.
And they are being housed and fed in completely unsustainable ways, in completely irrespective of what the operation does to the environment, to the water, to the soil. And so those communities are far more impacted, and than you would be in New York City, let's say, or in an urban environment. To me, the focus, the most simple way of focusing on what change is required is to focus on the soil. And I've been in a number of conversations where we would always end up with focus on the soil, because if you restore soil back to health, then everything else falls into place. Then you have to have sewage treatment plants attached to your CAFO, to your concentrated animal feeding operation, because you can't discharge all this sewage out there untreated. You can't do chemical agriculture. You can't use monocrop agriculture, because it destroys the soil and it releases all the carbon out of the soil. It kills the organic organisms inside the soil, which shuts down the entire supply chain over birds and mammals and up the food chain, so it creates its root cause for mass extinction of species. So when you focus just on soil as the core element and prioritize that as what needs to be restored and recovered, amazing things fall into place.
Though that's still only one dimension from the production aspect. You still need an understanding from the consumer's perspective that it's actually healthier and preferable.
Right. So that's where we actually started, because we were saying that on the one hand, you have farmers who understand that they are destroying their land. Lots of farmland is leased, by the way. It's an amazing number. Over 60% of farmland is on lease contracts. That makes it even more complicated because soil health requires investment, and so. But anyhow, so on the one hand, you have farmers understanding that they need to protect their soil. They're running into problems, losing their topsoil. It's washing out. It can't hold water. And so there's that issue. Then on the other hand, you have consumers who understand that this food that they're getting from industrial farms is full of chemicals. It's full of the meat is full of antibiotics and growth hormones. So there is a revulsion coming through eating this stuff because it makes you sick. But in the middle is a supply chain that has specialized around this food process as it is in place right now. It needs the standardization now inherent in industrial agriculture because the entire business model has been shaped around it. That happened in the last 40, 50 years or so, where that level of specialization has taken place. So the entire fast food industry, for example, is completely unable to deal with certain crop types because they are so highly specialized. McDonald's 34,000 restaurants all need a patty, a burger patty that they slap on the bun, as the core component of their business model. And so that is the problem is in the middle, connecting farmer with consumer. The middle is blocking that transition.
Yeah, but McDonald's has solved one problem because bacteria will not grow on their burger and buns. Okay.
Oh.
Well, it reminds me of what Otto Scharmer is saying in ULab, is that collectively we've created outcomes that nobody wants. And the key here is, I think, is the realization that even the actors within the system often don't really want the outcomes that they are generating. Therefore, but they have to recognize themselves in the story, right? That it's like the people in you have to see how your place fits, and then you can also look at ways for where you can make small changes that have impact.
Yes,
Go ahead.
Well, I agree with that because really we're talking about the tragedy of the commons, and there's new mechanisms out there, and we don't even know the game we're playing in. So it becomes important to be able to frame it so that we know that we're using up all the land, grazing all the land, even though it looks like we're thriving ourselves. And so that requires creating a picture for that to be seen.
Though the force by which it is moving forward, where Purdue says that we're processing more poultry annually for less money. How bad could that be? And people, people go to the store, and for the most part, they shop with their wallet, not with their head. That's slowly changing, but not very rapidly.
Klaus said something about how much land is leased. That's very important here. And it's a leveraged place for change. And I'll apply something that seems off the wall here. That's not unusual, right? But I've walked neighborhoods for political campaigns, and you have a list in your hand of who's a registered voter and home ownership. And pretty soon you come to the conclusion that you can walk up to a home and you're going to know whether they're a registered voter or not. The home with a lawn that's mowed, that the place is painted, everything like that, owner, registered voter, ownership. Now, in this situation of leased land and somebody industrial agriculture farming all of that leased land, I don't know how you're going to get them to care about soil health, because soil health may not get to the bottom line on a yearly basis.
Well, as Klaus will attest from the literature, it actually costs less to produce the same amount from good soil because of the better practices. You don't have to work the land as much. You don't have to use the high amounts of fertilizer and pesticides. But you have to make an investment of several years to actually get it to the point where it is good. So if you're willing to make that investment, in the longer term it pays off, but in the short term you just keep pumping chemicals and pesticides at it and produce what you can get out of it.
Right, and so if I'm looking at this from the perspective of a farmer, right, and I'm not a farmer, but let's just assume, just dream with me for a second. So let's just assume that I'm not really happy with the situation too, and then that there's that I much rather would have this situation where the soil is healthy and I wouldn't have to use so many pesticides, and I would be much more prone to issues like droughts and erosion, which also goes together with the current farm practices. Then, but where are the points that you really start to make an impact on decision making is things like crop insurance, and the fact that, hey, if I stay within the current systems, at least when the drought hits, I'm insured, so I still get my money back. Or what's my neighbor doing? And or yes, I'm leasing the land and my lease is going to expire in a couple of years from now. That's when you get to the individual levels, it's often not so much a question of big picture thinking, but of what are the specific influences that are acting on someone as an individual.
If I recall, I think the influences that Veronique mentioned are in the map someplace. I don't remember exactly.
Right. Yeah, no, I'm not saying they're not, but.
Well, I was saying that your points are valid, okay, and that they are relative, and the current set of relationships endeavor to keep the system the way it is.
I was reading an article this morning in Politico. Politico has a daily newsletter for agriculture, directly aimed at the agricultural industry. And They were saying, which is really for the first time, that farmers are being let down by the government, by the Department of Agriculture, because since the Trump administration has come in, the word climate change has been erased from all communication. And these farmers are simply not being educated on the imminent challenges they're facing with erratic weather patterns, which in a nutshell are prolonged periods of drought and more intensified precipitations. So the combination of those two creates a huge challenge for their crops and the entire growing cycle. This year, if you can imagine that, there were 20 million acres of farmland that couldn't be seeded because they were too wet. 20 million acres. I mean, that's an amazing number, historic record here. So farmers are starting to see that there is a challenge coming their way, but every time they want to talk about it, you have these insane climate change denial discussions. The Department of Agriculture has basically, I mean, all the employees are basically running for cover anytime somebody asks a question around climate change, because it's on the no-talk list for their department. So farmers are starting to really become aware and get into this. And as they become aware, if they are being provided with solutions, like no-till, put a cover crop on your soil, rotate your crops, then they're starting to see what can be done. And there was actually a video clip on PBS this week, where they highlighted a farmer in Iowa, who put different crops on the fields and explained what that is doing to his soil. So those are enormously important educational aspects to help the farming community to think about solutions, right? Not argue about what is happening, why it's happening, but protect yourself from what is invariably coming your way. And then on the consumer side, now we're talking about health. We're talking about you're eating meat that comes from animals that are sick. They're stuffed full of antibiotics and growth hormones. You want animals from healthy. I mean, you want meat from healthy animals. So it is to a large degree it's an educational exercise. And then in the middle, at some point in time, we have to convince the industry, the food industry, the processors and wholesalers and retailers, that you have to enable this link. You have to change your supply chain strategy and enable this. And there are technology options that are perfectly readily available, but we haven't reached a point yet to really get into it.
So why did the airlines change and stop allowing people to smoke on airplanes? Who drove that? Does anybody know? Okay.
Asthmatics?
Well, I don't know either. I was curious. I mean, that was a rather dramatic change. Happened over a number of years, but and then not smoking in office buildings. I remember
I don't believe it was the Tavern League.
Say again?
I don't think it was the Tavern League that drove it. I'm sorry. But
well, I can tell you, in the Western industry, it came from the state. Each state developed no smoking legislation. Some states were slower than others. I was in Oregon at the time. and there was like no more smoking in restaurants, and then
Yeah, but there had. I mean, the states didn't do this just because they hated the cigarette industry. I mean, the cigarette industry was donating to all of the politicians to get them not to pass regulations that interfered with the tobacco manufacturers. So, I mean, it had to have been driven by public demand. Okay?
Well, the American Heart Association, I think, had a big part, and the American Cancer Association, and they were bringing forward hard data that it was killing or causing asthma, or an asthma community. But the lobbying by the Tavern League and others, at least in my state, it took a long time before the obvious, before policy changed. Now, it might have happened quicker in the airlines because they weren't controlled by state, I don't think. Might have been a federal government.
I'm not sure, but maybe there were some lawsuits basically against employers who allowed or forced their employees to work in conditions that didn't meet the clean air regulation standards.
Yeah, I think that's the driver right there.
And that's, I think that drove a lot of stuff, actually.
I also think that there's a significant awareness now in terms of the consequences from smoking, and there's a public, I would say, there's a public clamor for for us to change, policy-wise and regulation-wise, and I think the airlines just listen to the masses. So I believe that awareness is probably one of the big factors in this.
So the masses have to come to understand what they're being fed is not good for them.
Right. And then you're dealing with the same disinformation here that took place in the tobacco industry.
And the sugar industry, sugar managed to escape by demonizing fat.
Right. Yeah, but just recently, a few weeks ago, the physicians of America, several medical groups actually came out saying you should reduce your consumption of meat. I mean, and particularly red meat. And then instantly, the group comes out saying, yeah, there's no statistical evidence for any of this. Just keep eating your meat. In fact, eat more of it.
Right. No. Hold on a minute. So, I know Trump has posted some false advertising on Facebook, and Facebook refuses to take it down. So I heard this morning that Elizabeth Warren is paying to post false advertising on Facebook about Mark Zuckerberg.
Yes.
I think that's hilarious. Okay, so, but that has absolutely nothing to do with what we do with this diagram. Or does it? I mean,
well, here it says Ralph Nader was the advocate that got it going. Pressure for an in-flight smoking ban. I'll send the link from Wikipedia. Yeah.
So I applaud Brian for creating all of these additional maps and attempting to ferret out some level of understanding in different directions or dimensions, most of which I haven't had nearly enough time to follow. Would you like to talk about some of them, Brian, or would it just give us headaches? You're muted. Try again. I unmuted you.
Okay. Probably would give most people headaches right now. There's so much going on at the same time. Like you said, they come from different angles. I mean, with one of them, I was trying to get into what Klaus was doing with my sequestration map. which I can't remember where the hell it's at. Oh no, it's relevant production factors copy. So I was trying to think about, okay, how does sequestration work within the system? Also keeping in mind there's a community down there that we have to consider. I don't consider this a very good map right now. I'm not quite sure how the flow is going to go, but I was just trying to eliminate as many factors as I could, but still leave in the economic factors. And I've got farmland in here, which our other maps, some of our other maps don't have, which I think is an important aspect. And then one of my other maps was doing what Romer was talking about, the provider awareness, which I tried to do something with. And then there's one map about innovation, which I haven't done anything with. I mean, there's nothing there. I mean, this was another idea from Klaus about having innovation brokers and how they could help the system. With an intermediary broker would put all these networks together, and I still don't have anything there either. So these are all works in progress.
Let me talk about this map here for a moment, innovation, and
Okay.
how innovations brokers could come in, because I just had a conversation yesterday with a consulting firm that does work in sustainability related issues in the Pacific Northwest. When you, the way that the farming cycle works is that the procurement of product is happening in advance before the crop goes into the ground, right? So you have procurement specialists who do demand forecasting for carrots. And the way Walmart does this now, they have procurement specialists by category. So there is a produce category buyer, and he determines I need 1,000 acres of carrots by next June. And then he goes and contracts that with the farmer. And so the crop is basically sold before it even goes into the ground. And so that happens on a global level, really. These people are highly specialized. Now they have their contacts and sources. So to change that, if you want to get into, let's say you want to challenge at your local community, the hospital caterer or the school or the college caterer to source more local product. So it drives me crazy because they get the caterer to sign off, okay, I'm going to buy 3% local product, but then they don't do anything with it. And next year, when that commitment comes up, he's now trying to find local product. But since there hasn't been any advanced contracting and since there hasn't been any aggregation function inserted into the system, it doesn't work. So basically, the moment that I go to a local caterer and I get the guy to agree to a percent of local sourcing, I then have to go and find farmers who can anticipate and fulfill this commitment. So that's where this brokerage function is completely missing. And there are virtually no independent brokers left. Because the caterers are buying from Cisco, which is a national provider, completely linked into industrial agriculture. And Cisco has no interest in messing around with local consumption. So either we get Cisco to assume responsibility for local sourcing, and then they do this contracting, which they know how to do and they have the systems to do, or we find an independent broker, who specializes in soliciting local contracts and then finding local providers to fulfill those contracts. So that would be part of that transition path to heal local communities, empower local production, and I mean, if there's a small dairy, why couldn't at least part of their production be integrated into sourcing strategy of a Cisco.
In the article I sent about the tragedy of the commons, it goes into that sort of idea that, but the rules have changed because it's the game of numbers, such huge numbers that you're interacting with on the internet. If you don't have presence in that huge number idea, then the players that control are not going to even worry about that individual farmer.
Right. So what's missing is the aggregation function. So co-ops used to represent, let's say, 200 farms. And the co-ops would go out and negotiate contracts. And then they would assign allotments to their individual farmers. You do 20 acres, you do 5 acres, you do 30 acres. And then they all get instructions when to plant, when to put the crop into the ground. So it pretty much comes up at the same time. It comes to a central consolidation point, and then it gets shipped out. So now you got your 1,000 acres of carrots, but they come from 50 farms. And that function has been completely eliminated. There are virtually no co-ops left. Because now the Walmart and Kroger and Albertson and Costco, they have pulled all of that stuff in-house.
And they can do it with the tools of the internet now. That wasn't possible at one time because you actually had have physical contact with people to control the market. So yeah, I think it's the new rules of the game. And
so there's actually software on the market. Alibaba from China. I mean, they have refined this and lifted thousands of small farmers out of poverty. I mean, I was in Inner Mongolia, where the average farmer has like 3 or 4 cows, and they're able to supply a dairy that has enormous volumes. But it's coming from these small farmers. And by putting 3 cows onto their farm and selling the milk, now they can send their kids to school. And so it revitalizes the entire community. And so the way Alibaba does that, you would have a dairy company put online, we need 1 million gallons of milk or whatever, and we need this volume of milk. And then you have individual farmers pick part of that order until it's filled.
They commit to a piece of it.
So the software drives the entire brokerage and aggregation function. And that's, I mean, I have been trying to get people interested in for example, the chairman of Salesforce, the CEO of Salesforce, is apparently a very progressive guy, and Salesforce software would be perfectly suitable to pull something like this, but you just can't break through the inertia here to really get interest in that sort of thing.
But that software operates on what's called holonomics, where each of the individuals that you described, like farmers, have opportunity to see the dynamics of the whole. And so that's a huge thing in that you have a piece of software that allows all the individuals to participate in the dynamics of the whole.
Right.
But
yeah,
Klaus, Salesforce is the wrong place. I remember Tom Peters, some of you may remember him, In Search of Excellence and a bunch of other books throughout the ages. He said, innovation always comes from the wrong people at the wrong time in the wrong industry for the wrong reason. The taxi companies did not invent Uber and Lyft, okay? The airplane manufacturers didn't invent the jet engine. And then it goes on and on and on. I mean, the mainframe manufacturers didn't invent the Mini, okay? Somebody has to come along and disrupt the current system in a way that you can't go back.
Right. Right.
So trying to get the entrenched players in the current architecture to change their way is impossible. You have to disrupt it in a way that they can't do anything about. They usually typically don't see it coming because they're so ingrained in the way that they do things.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked with a local software startup who just flat ran out of money before they could get this thing on the ground because you simply can't sign up commercial wholesale accounts. I mean, the school system, the local school caterer, it doesn't want to go through the trouble of splitting up their supply chain, and sourcing from Cisco here and then doing something on the side there. It just, so they can't create the kind of volume they need. So you need to have a more significant corporate player, let's say an Aldi or Trader Joe's or something like this, to come on board with you and start using this to insert that into the system, because the outcome would be that they can now provide regenerative organic food to their customers and create a differentiation in their business model, and then start explaining why that makes so much sense to their customers who are willing, ready to listen to that.
I need to leave, so I'm sorry, but
that's okay. I have to leave in a couple of minutes also. I've got another meeting coming up. So
thank you.
Thank you. Glad you were here. Bye.
Bye.
So between now and the next meeting, which can be on Thursday if you're up for it.
If I'm not here, I'm here in Spirit on Thursday.
Okay. We'll assume that that's on good spirits. So yeah. I mean, it's currently extremely painful about sort of not having a clue as to how to progress forward with this. It drives me to distraction when I'd like to be doing other things. I find myself pondering this map, saying, where does it go from here? And I don't know. So I'm open to thoughts about. I mean, we need a breakthrough. We need an aha moment, and I'll take one any place I can find one.
Question for you, Gene. When you say
Yes.
Progressing, what are you trying to achieve in your thoughts?
As I started this session, nobody said that they were willing to say that they thoroughly understood this picture, including me. Okay, how do I distill this down to something that I can get a hold of, that I could actually think about presenting to someone else, to say, this is what I think, help me continue, and realize that there are aspects of it for which there are whole additional maps of detail. All right. In other words, I don't have to have, I have to eat the elephant one bite at a time. All right. So give me a part of the elephant that I can understand. Give me a little elephant.
Well, I like what Klaus was saying about the farmer with 3 cows, and maybe that farmer or a small player could, in that example he gave, could look at the system and even see how they were diverting some of the milk, and that maybe that might even have an impact on the big system that we're looking at here. So right now we're looking at a static picture, but when you're around, Gene, when we make a comment, it becomes dynamic because the thing moves. So that
doesn't move that much.
well, and so when I look at it, I think of some of the lines that I was involved with, and I can't verbalize them unless I zoom down into it. But anyway, the ability to have ownership from multiple points of view to see the whole. And that is the mathematics of the software that Klaus was talking about, that all the individuals can take ownership of the big picture.
Well, I'm not sure that all of the individuals own all of the big picture. The individuals own aspects that are most relevant to them without becoming completely overwhelmed or mired in all of the rest of it. I mean, I don't know how many times I came here and went back to here and focused on this and pondered this and went one step further out and said, ugh. So I went back and pondered this some more, okay? And trying to, I mean, if I have to go, how many steps away can I actually hold in my mind and get a sense of what it tells me, okay? I mean, I think I have to have 5 to 7 loops. And that's not to say that all the rest of the stuff is irrelevant. Right. I don't have to be overwhelmed by all of it at the same time. I mean, Kumu gives us the ability to have lots of maps, right? So I could say that this piece right here is 4 more loops someplace else. The thing that I did with, I'm not going to go there again. The Hawaii quality of life model, where each one of the elements was actually another 2 or 3 loops on another map. But even then, that map was overwhelming because it had 25 bubbles on it.
No, before we started this, Gene, I thought there was a discussion about certain rules in terms of how many degrees are we going to be considering for simplification. So I'm not sure if that would help.
I'm not sure that there are any hard and fast rules.
Right.
I mean, the whole idea is that, or the way that I continue to think about it is, the map is supposed to be a simplification of reality intended to promote understanding. If it doesn't promote understanding, either it's not a good map or I'm just too freaking dumb, okay? One or the other.
I think we're trying to put too much into one map, and this is my point when I'm talking about macro. So the way this thing is.
Whose dog is driving me crazy?
Oh, hold on.
It's just your dog, Gene.
It was Brian's dog. Go ahead, Klaus.
So the way I have this thing in my head is, there is an existing situation, right? So we have mapped the existing food system, and then I would simplify this map by saying this is as is, right? Then going through the systems value system, going through there into here's where we want to go. So you create a pathway of leveraging the system to change its state, and we have everything in one map. And I think it's just overwhelming. It gets really confusing as to what is the conversation at this point. So if we simply say the as-is situation, we are destroying our topsoil. We are raising animals in ways that is inhumane and pathological, and transfers pathologies into the human food chain. it's an unsustainable system. We want to stabilize the system, make it sustainable. That means it has to go through a regenerative process. To come from unsustainable to sustainable, it has to be regenerated. That requires a paradigm shift at the system's value system level, so that we are now looking at food in a different way. And then what are the transition pathways to get into a sustainable state? So that's
Well,
what works in my head.
we could start and build a potential 2B map. Just put this away, put local sustainable food system on another map, and build a map that we would think contained the appropriate relationships to actually drive a local sustainable food system.
Yeah. So if we take as is right now, anchor that on the system's value system, and put paradigm shift discussions into that the map, and then from there develop transition pathways using leverage points to create a stabilized, sustainable system.
So you can summarize this map in a half a dozen bullet points. Okay. Though you don't have, in other words, you could just, and you did 3 or 4 of them in the past couple of moments. And then you could go to another map and build a map that we think these are the appropriate set of relationships to drive a local sustainable food system to support the community in the future, and not actually have to connect the 2 of them in intricate detail.
Yeah, so that's how I use my PowerPoint presentations. When I do a presentation, I use PowerPoint, and I say, here's the mess we have right now. You know, this is what it is. This is what it's causing, right? So we have to change the way we think about our environment, our topsoil, the food we eat. And then here are the transition pathways, the levers we can pull to get to that new state.
Okay, Klaus, between now and Thursday, would you create 5 to 7 bullet points for this map?
Okay.
I mean, you already did 3 or 4 of them. So, I mean, and then on Thursday, we'll go ahead and try to build another map, unless that makes somebody deathly ill. And then
No, and I want to say about, I sent too many links probably, but I did send the link on the CBS because someone asked me to do that. And
on what?
On the CBS 60 Minutes.
Okay, I found it.
And if you watch that, one of the examples was a person that could not quit smoking, and so they needed, as you said, Gene, a disruptor. And a disruptor in this case was a drug, but you need a disruptor to reframe it. At least that's what they're saying with the structure of behavior of people. And I'm saying, and what you're saying is, you don't need the drug, but you do need a disruptor.
I quit cold turkey 3 times.
Well, anyway, there's one of these in my neighborhood now. They're everywhere.
Okay.
Okay. Yep.
The links will be in the events point. I'll give you when I send out the link to the video, I'll send you the link. All of the links that have been posted in the chat room will be in there. Okay. All right. I have to run. I got another meeting coming up. So thank you all.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
See you on Thursday.
All right, take care.